At 29 years old, Lenora Ashcombe stood on the muddy bank of the Coldwater River with only $12.43 stitched into the hem of her worn skirt. After the timber company dismissed her late father's claim, the town council declared her family land forfeit over unpaid taxes she never truly owed, and nearly every neighbor she had once helped turned away because they believed she carried nothing but bad fortune. Yet with that last handful of coins, she purchased a weathered, abandoned ferry dock from a county auction outside the fading river settlement of Brimstone Crossing, a purchase so foolish that even the auctioneer laughed before striking his hammer, never imagining that beneath those warped gray planks, something long hidden waited in perfect silence, something capable of changing not only one forgotten woman's future, but the destiny of an entire river community that had almost surrendered to time itself. Settle in, and let us tell you the story of Lenora Ashcombe. If you're watching from a place that feels forgotten, tell us in the comments where you're listening from, because every forgotten place has a story waiting beneath its own weathered boards. We have always believed that rivers remember more than people do. They carry away spoken promises, tears, laughter, and secrets alike, but they never truly lose them. Somewhere beneath every current rests a piece of yesterday, waiting for the patient hands of tomorrow, and no one understood that truth better than Lenora, though she did not know it yet. She first opened her eyes during the spring floods of 1889, in a modest clapboard farmhouse resting several miles outside Brimstone Crossing, where the river curved gently through tall cottonwoods before widening into calm, reflective waters. Her father, Elias Ashcombe, built wagons, repaired fishing boats, sharpened tools, and accepted payment in nearly anything honest families could spare. Sometimes they brought flour, sometimes they brought eggs. Once an elderly widow insisted on paying with 3 hand-woven quilts because she possessed nothing else, and Elias accepted them with the same grateful smile he would have offered for a sack filled with silver coins. Lenora's mother, Miriam, believed every useful thing deserved another chance before it was abandoned forever. Broken lanterns became flower pots. Cracked barrels collected rainwater. Bent horseshoes became sturdy door hooks. Every evening after supper, she would spread worn household objects across the kitchen table and patiently show young Lenora how to repair rather than replace. People, she often whispered while guiding her daughter's small hands across rough wood grain. Look too quickly at what something used to be instead of what it can still become. Those words settled quietly inside Lenora, deeper than she realized. As the years drifted onward, she became known throughout the valley as the girl who could mend almost anything placed before her. She restored rocking chairs whose legs had splintered. She stitched blankets too tattered for ordinary sewing. She repaired fishing nets until they looked nearly new, despite countless patches. The older folks often remarked that the child seemed to possess an unusual gift for listening before fixing, as though every broken object first wished to tell its own story before allowing itself to heal. Elias encouraged that quiet patience. Rather than rushing through repairs, he insisted she understand why something failed in the first place. "Wood speaks," he would say while resting a calloused palm against an aging beam. "Iron speaks. Rope speaks. Rivers speak loudest of all. If you listen long enough, they'll tell you exactly what happened." Many laughed kindly at such sayings, believing them nothing more than an old craftsman's poetry. But Lenora listened as though every sentence belonged inside a sacred book. By the time she reached 14, she often wandered to the old ferry crossing, just south of town, where travelers once crossed the Coldwater River before the county financed a newer steel bridge farther upstream. The original ferry dock had already begun surrendering itself to weather. Its pilings leaned slightly. Moss clung stubbornly between warped boards. The ferry boat itself had long since vanished, sold for scrap after commerce shifted toward the bridge. Most townsfolk ignored the abandoned structure entirely, calling it an eyesore that should eventually be dismantled. Yet Lenora loved sitting upon its faded planks during quiet evenings when sunlight turned the river into flowing amber. She imagined every traveler who had once stood there, farmers carrying harvests, soldiers returning home, mothers holding sleeping children, merchants leading horses across the ferry. Every footprint had disappeared, yet somehow she believed the dock remembered them all. Elias occasionally joined her there after work. "Everything forgotten still matters to somebody," he would murmur, while watching driftwood float downstream. She never argued. With each passing year, Brimstone Crossing changed. Larger trading centers emerged farther west. Railroads redirected commerce. Younger families packed their belongings and chased opportunities elsewhere. Empty storefronts slowly multiplied along Main Street, until even hopeful conversations grew shorter. Businesses closed one by one like lanterns extinguished against an approaching night. Some blamed progress. Others blamed poor leadership. A few simply stopped believing tomorrow would improve upon today. But Elias refused bitterness. He continued repairing what others abandoned, quietly serving neighbors who increasingly struggled to pay him. Miriam baked bread for widows who pretended they were not hungry. Their home never contained much wealth, yet warmth lingered there in every season, because generosity somehow multiplied itself within those simple walls. Lenora inherited that same quiet abundance, though she possessed little besides skilled hands, patient eyes, and an unwavering belief that forgotten things deserved another chance. Nobody imagined how fiercely those lessons would soon be tested. The year Lenora turned 22, the first true crack appeared beneath the quiet strength that had always held the Ashcombe family together. It did not come with thunder or fire or sudden tragedy. It arrived the way many hardships do, almost politely, slipping through the front door disguised as an ordinary autumn cough that lingered in Elias Ashcombe's chest, far longer than anyone expected. He dismissed it for weeks, laughing softly whenever Miriam urged him to rest, insisting that winter repairs would not finish themselves, and that wagons waiting for new axles would not grow patient merely because an old carpenter felt tired. Yet every morning his shoulders bent a little farther, and every evening the familiar rhythm of his hammer grew slower, until even Lenora noticed that silence lingered between each strike. We often imagine that strong people collapse all at once, but strength usually fades quietly, allowing those who love them to believe tomorrow will somehow return everything to normal. By the first snowfall, Elias could scarcely lift the oak beams he once carried alone. By Christmas, neighbors began completing heavy work for him, without mentioning why. By early spring, the man who had repaired nearly every porch, fence, and fishing boat in Brimstone Crossing could no longer climb the short staircase leading to his own bedroom. His final weeks unfolded with remarkable peace. He asked for no grand speeches and offered no dramatic farewell. Instead, he spent long afternoons beside the kitchen window, carving small wooden birds that he placed one by one into Lenora's hands. "Every piece of wood remembers the tree it came from," he whispered one evening, while sunlight settled across the floorboards. "People remember where they came from too, though hardship sometimes makes them forget. Don't let bitterness steal your memory." Those became the last words she ever heard him speak clearly. When he passed before dawn 3 days later, the entire valley gathered beneath gray skies to carry him to the hillside cemetery overlooking the Coldwater River. Farmers stood beside merchants. Fishermen removed weathered hats from their heads. Even travelers who barely knew his name paused long enough to bow respectfully as the simple pine coffin disappeared beneath the earth. Lenora believed such kindness meant the town would never abandon her family, yet grief has a peculiar way of revealing the difference between affection and commitment. During the months that followed, life continued demanding payment despite mourning. Miriam struggled to keep the workshop operating, but customers gradually sought younger craftsmen capable of finishing larger commissions more quickly. Bills that Elias had always managed quietly began arriving with uncomfortable regularity. Taxes increased after the county approved improvements around the newer steel bridge, improvements that bypassed homes like theirs entirely, while somehow raising the value officials claimed their little farm possessed. Miriam sold 2 milk cows first, then several acres nearest the creek. Finally, she accepted sewing work late into each evening, until candlelight flickered beneath her tired eyes long after midnight. Lenora labored beside her without complaint. She repaired furniture, sharpened tools, mended harnesses, and even learned to patch river barges when fishermen could not afford proper shipwrights. Every coin found its way into a carefully labeled tin beneath the pantry shelf, yet somehow expenses always arrived before savings could grow. Even then they remained hopeful, because hope had become another family habit, passed down as faithfully as any treasured heirloom. For nearly 4 years they survived through determination alone. Seasons turned. Children became adults. Empty storefronts multiplied downtown. The railroad farther west drew business away with every passing month. Brimstone Crossing slowly shrank until familiar faces disappeared almost without notice. Then another sorrow arrived, quieter but no less final. Miriam developed a fever during one unusually wet spring, after spending days nursing neighbors whose own families had already departed for larger towns. She insisted it was nothing serious, smiling gently whenever Lenora begged her to remain in bed. Yet within 2 weeks, even standing beside the stove exhausted her. The doctor traveled from Riverton, examined her carefully, and left without offering false comfort. Lenora sat beside her mother's bed every evening, reading aloud from the worn family Bible, while rain tapped softly against the windows. Miriam listened with closed eyes, until one afternoon she reached weakly toward her daughter's hand. "Promise me something," she whispered. Lenora nodded before hearing the request. "When the world throws something away, look twice before you do the same." Those words carried the same quiet certainty Miriam had spoken throughout her life. Before another sunrise painted the eastern sky, she too was gone. The farmhouse suddenly felt impossibly large. Every chair seemed occupied by memory instead of people. Lenora continued tending the little property because stopping would have felt like surrender, yet loneliness settled over the rooms as steadily as dust. Still she endured. She planted vegetables, repaired roofs, chopped firewood, and accepted every odd job anyone offered. Had circumstances remained merely difficult, perhaps she might have preserved everything her parents built. But hardship rarely travels alone. The following winter, the Northern Timber Consortium purchased thousands of acres surrounding Brimstone Crossing, promising prosperity through expanded logging operations. Wealthy investors arrived wearing polished boots and carrying official documents stamped with county seals. Surveyors measured boundaries few local families had ever questioned. Lines shifted mysteriously upon newly drawn maps. Long-forgotten technicalities resurfaced inside courthouse ledgers. Men who once greeted neighbors warmly now quoted regulations instead of shaking hands. Lenora's modest property suddenly appeared to overlap timber rights claimed by the consortium. She presented her father's deeds, yellowed but genuine, only to hear lawyers argue that revised surveys rendered earlier measurements unreliable. Hearings stretched across months, while legal fees consumed every dollar she possessed. She sold furniture to continue the fight, then livestock. Finally, her father's cherished workshop tools disappeared one by one into strangers' wagons after hurried auctions conducted beneath cold, indifferent skies. Throughout the ordeal, she expected someone to speak on her behalf. Elias had repaired half the town without charging fair prices. Miriam had fed hungry children during lean winters. Surely gratitude would outweigh convenience. Instead, many lowered their eyes whenever she passed. A few quietly apologized before admitting they could not risk angering the consortium that now employed their sons and husbands. Others convinced themselves the matter belonged solely to the courts. Even kindness sometimes retreats when fear becomes expensive. On the final hearing day, the county judge ruled in favor of the timber company. The Ashcombe property officially transferred ownership before sunset. Lenora received notice ordering her to vacate within 10 days. She packed what little remained into 2 trunks, though most possessions had already vanished through necessity. When the company's foreman arrived with laborers to secure the buildings, she stood silently beneath the old cottonwood, watching strangers nail boards across windows her father once polished every spring. One young worker avoided meeting her gaze while carrying away the workshop sign Elias had carved decades earlier. That single moment wounded her more deeply than losing the house itself, because it felt as though someone had erased proof her family had ever existed there. She walked away carrying one small satchel, her mother's sewing kit, her father's carving knife, and $12.43, hidden safely inside the hem of her skirt, never imagining that the poorest day of her life had quietly positioned her at the very edge of the greatest discovery Brimstone Crossing would ever know. For nearly a week, Lenora wandered wherever daylight and aching feet carried her. She accepted shelter inside an abandoned hayshed one night, beneath the porch of a shuttered general store another, and once inside the warm loft of an elderly couple's barn, after they silently pretended not to notice her slipping through the open door before dusk. Pride urged her to keep moving before dawn each morning, unwilling to burden strangers who already struggled beneath their own hardships. She found occasional work splitting kindling, repairing broken stools, stitching torn saddle blankets, and mending cracked tool handles, earning just enough to buy coarse bread, dried beans, and coffee that tasted more of roasted barley than actual beans. Every evening she carefully counted the coins hidden within the hem of her skirt, watching the little fortune grow smaller despite every effort to protect it. $12 became 11. 11 became 10. Each missing coin carried away another measure of certainty, yet she refused to surrender the quiet dignity her parents had taught her. She still greeted people kindly. She still paused to help an elderly traveler lift heavy crates onto a wagon. She still repaired a broken gate for a widow, without accepting payment, because she recognized the same loneliness she now carried inside herself. Kindness, she believed, should never become something reserved only for prosperous seasons. One windy afternoon she wandered back toward the river, drawn less by purpose than memory. The cold water flowed exactly as it always had, broad and patient, beneath an endless blue sky, paying little attention to the worries unfolding along its banks. Cottonwood leaves shimmered silver whenever the breeze shifted. Kingfishers darted low across the water before disappearing beneath overhanging branches. The river remained faithful to itself, while nearly everything around it had changed. She followed the shoreline until the abandoned ferry crossing appeared once more through tangled weeds. Years had passed since she last sat there with her father, yet the weathered dock still stretched into the current like an old hand refusing to release yesterday. Time had not treated it gently. Several support beams leaned at awkward angles. The handrails had long since collapsed. Thick moss covered many of the planks, and river grass pushed upward through widening cracks. A faded county notice nailed crookedly to a post declared the structure condemned and scheduled for public auction the following afternoon. Lenora almost smiled at the absurdity. Who would purchase a forgotten dock that no longer served a ferry? Even dismantling it for lumber would cost more than the timber might be worth. Curiosity carried her into town the next day, where fewer than 20 people gathered outside the courthouse for the monthly auction of abandoned county properties. Most bidders came hoping for usable wagons, surplus fencing, or confiscated livestock. The ferry dock appeared near the end of the list, announced almost as an afterthought. The auctioneer unfolded a yellowed document, cleared his throat, and described the property in a voice that suggested even he doubted anyone would listen. One abandoned ferry landing situated on the eastern bank of Coldwater River, no operational equipment included, sold strictly as is. Laughter rippled through the small crowd before bidding even began. "Start us at $20, the auctioneer called. Silence answered him. 15. More silence. Someone joked that the river ought to pay people for taking it away. Another suggested the dock made a fine home for turtles and should remain theirs. The auctioneer sighed impatiently. $10. Still no response. Lenora looked down at the careful stitches concealing her remaining savings. She remembered evenings beside her father on those same boards. She remembered her mother's gentle insistence that forgotten things deserved another chance. She remembered every lesson about listening before judging. None of those memories explained why her heart suddenly refused to let the moment pass. Before doubt could silence her, she raised one hand. $10. Heads turned almost instantly. Someone recognized her and whispered loud enough for others to hear. "That's the Ashcombe girl. Lost her land, and now she's buying rotten wood." Chuckles spread through the gathering. The auctioneer stared uncertainly before asking whether anyone wished to offer more. Nobody did. Not because they pitied her, but because nobody believed the property possessed even $10 worth of value. The hammer struck once. Sold. Another burst of laughter followed, though a few older faces remained strangely thoughtful. Lenora stepped forward, paid the money with steady hands, and accepted the folded deed. After fees, she possessed only $2.43. The document itself seemed almost weightless, yet somehow heavier than anything she had ever carried. As she walked away, a prosperous merchant named Horace Bell called after her, with amused disbelief. "You'll spend more fixing that dock than your father ever earned building one." She did not answer. There are moments when silence protects hope better than words ever could. That evening she returned alone to her newly purchased piece of forgotten riverbank. Sunset painted the water with broad ribbons of copper and gold, while distant birds settled into the trees. She stepped carefully across the weathered planks, testing each board before trusting her weight. Every creak echoed softly over the slow-moving current. Though neglected for years, the old structure retained a quiet stubbornness. Many timbers remained surprisingly solid beneath layers of age and moss. Kneeling near the center, she brushed away accumulated leaves and river silt with the edge of her sleeve. The wood beneath revealed hand-hewn craftsmanship unlike modern mill lumber. Someone had built this place with remarkable care generations earlier. She spent hours examining joints, pegs, and support beams, not because she possessed a plan, but because understanding always came before repairing. As twilight deepened, one small detail interrupted her careful inspection. Near the middle of the dock, 3 neighboring planks carried carpenter's marks unlike every other board surrounding them. The symbols were tiny, nearly erased by decades of weather, yet unmistakably intentional. Her father's voice echoed gently through memory. Wood speaks. Listen long enough, and it tells you what happened. Lenora traced the faded markings with her fingertips. The surrounding nails showed deep rust, but those securing the marked boards appeared strangely different, their heads resting slightly lower than the others, as though driven at another time by another hand. She tapped each plank lightly with the handle of her father's carving knife. Most answered with the dull, solid sound expected of thick oak resting over river supports. The marked boards answered differently, hollow, very slightly, yet undeniably so. She froze without realizing she had stopped breathing. Beneath years of mud, moss, and forgotten footsteps, beneath 3 weathered planks everyone else had ignored, something waited in complete silence. She could not yet know whether it was worthless debris, forgotten tools, or nothing at all, but every lesson her parents had ever taught her urged the same quiet command. Look twice before deciding something has no value. With darkness gathering around the river, and only the first stars beginning to appear overhead, Lenora carefully packed away her few tools, knowing she would return at first light with a pry bar borrowed from a nearby blacksmith, completely unaware that the hidden space beneath those ancient planks had remained untouched for more than half a century, and that its secret had been waiting, with remarkable patience, for exactly the kind of woman who believed forgotten things still deserved to be heard. The first light of morning slipped gently across the Coldwater River, turning the mist into long ribbons of silver that drifted above the current, as though the water itself had begun dreaming. Lenora arrived carrying only a borrowed pry bar, a small hammer, her father's carving knife, and a canvas satchel containing stale bread wrapped in cloth. She paused for several moments before stepping onto the dock, allowing herself to listen, as Elias had taught her. The river lapped quietly against the old pilings. Somewhere upstream, a loon called across the stillness. Every sound seemed strangely clear, as though the world itself expected something long delayed to finally happen. She knelt beside the 3 marked planks and carefully scraped away decades of packed dirt until the carpenter's symbols became easier to see. They were not initials. They were tiny compass roses, each pointing toward the center board. Whoever carved them had wanted only someone observant enough to notice. Most people would never have looked closely enough. Even after finding them, many would have dismissed the marks as idle scratches. Lenora gently inserted the pry bar beneath the first plank. The old nails protested with long groaning creaks before finally surrendering their grip. She lifted the board aside, exposing nothing but darkness beneath. One by one, she removed the remaining planks until a rectangular opening appeared between the heavy support beams. Cool air drifted upward, carrying the unmistakable scent of damp cedar instead of river mud. She frowned. Cedar resisted rot far better than ordinary pine. Someone had intentionally lined the hidden cavity with expensive wood. Reaching inside, her fingers brushed against a smooth iron ring fastened to what felt like a fitted lid. Her heartbeat quickened. She grasped the ring firmly and pulled. At first, nothing happened. Then, with years of river silt breaking loose around its edges, a narrow cedar hatch slowly lifted. Beneath it rested a carefully constructed compartment untouched by water, despite more than 50 years beneath the dock. Inside sat a long iron-bound chest, no larger than a traveling trunk, wrapped in faded oilcloth that had preserved it remarkably well. For several moments she simply stared, hardly trusting her own eyes. Nobody had mentioned hidden compartments beneath the old ferry landing. No county records had hinted at secret storage. The auctioneer himself clearly believed he had sold nothing more than collapsing lumber. She climbed carefully into the shallow space and struggled until the heavy chest rested upon the dock above. Rust coated the hinges, yet the lock itself had never been forced. It remained exactly as someone had left it decades earlier. Lenora examined every side before noticing a brass plate nearly hidden beneath corrosion. She rubbed it clean with the edge of her sleeve until faint lettering emerged. Property of Gideon Mercer, River Steward, Brimstone Crossing, 1838. The date startled her. The chest had rested beneath the dock for more than half a century. She searched for a key but found none. After several patient attempts with her father's carving knife, the weakened lock finally gave way with a dull snap. The lid rose slowly, releasing the faint dry scent of old paper preserved against impossible odds. Instead of gold or jewels, the chest contained neatly stacked leather journals tied with blue ribbon, several sealed bundles of letters, rolled survey maps protected inside wax tubes, a brass compass still shining softly beneath its tarnish, and beneath everything else, a heavy leather ledger thicker than any book she had ever held. At first, disappointment briefly crossed her face. She had not expected treasure exactly, yet some hidden corner of her heart had wondered whether enough money might lie inside to purchase back her parents' land. Instead, she found papers, carefully organized by a man whose name history had almost forgotten. She opened the uppermost journal with extraordinary care. The ink had faded but remained perfectly readable. The first page carried a simple inscription. If these records are found after I am gone, may they belong not to one person, but to every honest family who calls this river home. Gideon Mercer. Lenora read the sentence twice before continuing. Hour after hour she sat upon the weathered dock while sunlight climbed steadily across the sky. Gideon Mercer had been the first official river steward, appointed after Brimstone Crossing was established. His journals described floods, ferry crossings, harvest seasons, births, storms, and the daily lives of families settling the valley. Yet woven among those ordinary observations appeared repeated references to something called the Community River Trust. The phrase surfaced again and again throughout the journals, always accompanied by careful financial notes. Curious now, Lenora reached for the enormous leather ledger. Every page contained names. Hundreds of names. Beside each appeared detailed records of small contributions made by river merchants, ferry passengers, fishermen, mill owners, farmers, and traders over nearly 25 years. Pennies, nickels, dimes, small donations, collected voluntarily from anyone crossing the ferry. Gideon explained their purpose inside a folded letter tucked into the front cover. The river has given us everything. If every traveler leaves behind only the smallest kindness, generations yet unborn will inherit schools, bridges, libraries, wells, and help during years when crops fail. The money shall never belong to officials. It belongs to the people. Trustees shall guard it forever. Lenora stopped reading. Her breath caught inside her throat. She hurried through the remaining pages until another document nearly slipped free. It bore the official county seal, signed by judges, land commissioners, merchants, pastors, and founders of Brimstone Crossing itself. The River Trust had been legally established under territorial law decades before statehood. Its assets included river tolls, donated land, timber leases, ferry revenues, mineral rights, and investments held in eastern banks until needed for public works. Page after page documented extraordinary growth. Then the entries suddenly stopped. The final completed page dated 53 years earlier. After that, nothing. No explanation. No closing statement. Only blank paper. Lenora frowned in confusion. She searched the bottom of the chest more carefully. Hidden beneath a false wooden panel, she discovered one final sealed envelope bearing Gideon Mercer's handwriting. The wax seal remained unbroken. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside rested a letter addressed simply, "For to whoever finds this before greed does." Gideon's handwriting remained remarkably steady, despite the years separating them. He explained that several influential businessmen had learned of the expanding Community River Trust and intended to seize control through political appointments and falsified legal transfers. Fearing corruption, he had hidden every original deed, financial ledger, survey map, trustee signature, and legal charter beneath the ferry dock, until honest leadership could reclaim them. He intended to retrieve the documents once the danger passed. The opportunity never came. Near the bottom of the final page, another sentence nearly stopped Lenora's heart. According to the last verified accounting completed before these records were concealed, the Community River Trust possesses ownership interests, accumulated revenues, and secured deposits estimated at $284,000, held in trust for the citizens of Brimstone Crossing, and protected under territorial covenant until lawfully reclaimed with these original records. Lenora stared silently at the figure. It exceeded any sum she could truly imagine. Properly claimed, it represented enough wealth not merely to rescue one struggling woman, but to rebuild nearly every crumbling part of the forgotten town. Yet another realization followed immediately behind the first. If the documents were genuine, powerful people who had profited from their disappearance would never welcome their return. She slowly closed the letter while the river flowed peacefully beneath the old dock, unaware that after more than half a century, its greatest secret had finally found exactly the guardian Gideon Mercer had hoped for. Not the richest person, nor the strongest, but the one who had chosen a forgotten place, simply because everyone else believed it held no value at all. Lenora remained on the dock until the afternoon sun drifted low enough to cast long shadows across the water. She resisted the temptation to hurry into town waving Gideon Mercer's journals, as though the truth alone would instantly restore justice. Elias had taught her that fine wood split easily when struck too quickly, and she sensed people could behave much the same way. Extraordinary discoveries demanded patient hands. She carefully wrapped every journal, map, deed, and letter back inside the oilcloth before carrying the chest to an abandoned storage shed that still stood several yards from the old ferry landing. Its roof leaked only slightly, and beneath a loose section of flooring, she fashioned a temporary hiding place known only to herself. She kept with her just 3 items: Gideon's final letter, the official charter establishing the Community River Trust, and the thick leather ledger. If anything happened to the hidden chest, those documents alone could prove enough to begin asking difficult questions. Before leaving the riverbank, she quietly replaced the cedar hatch beneath the dock and laid the weathered planks back exactly as she had found them. Fresh nail holes would have invited curiosity. Better that the old landing continue appearing forgotten for a little while longer. As she walked toward Brimstone Crossing, her thoughts raced faster than her footsteps. $284,000 represented unimaginable wealth in a town where shopkeepers argued over pennies and families bartered eggs for lamp oil. Yet the money itself mattered less than what it had been intended to accomplish. Gideon had not hidden a private fortune. He had protected a promise made by ordinary people to generations they would never live to meet. That promise had been stolen, not by thieves in the night, but by silence. Someone had benefited from forgetting. She needed to discover who. The courthouse stood near the center of town, its once white paint weathered into a tired gray that matched the mood of the streets surrounding it. Lenora did not enter immediately. Instead, she visited the small public library, occupying 2 rooms beside the church. Few people came there anymore. Dust settled upon shelves containing old county reports and territorial records few citizens remembered existed. Behind the front desk sat Mrs. Edith Penrose, a widow nearly 70 years old, whose spectacles rested permanently near the end of her nose. She had known Lenora since childhood, and greeted her with genuine warmth rather than pity. "You've to your father's eyes today," she said softly. Whenever he came searching for old records, he wore that same determined look. Lenora smiled faintly, before explaining she wished to study the earliest county histories. Mrs. Penrose asked no unnecessary questions. She simply unlocked a back room where shelves held fragile ledgers dating to the settlement's founding. For the remainder of the afternoon, Lenora compared Gideon's journals against official county minutes. At first, everything matched perfectly. Trustee appointments, ferry revenues, public meetings, river tolls. Then, quite suddenly, the Community River Trust disappeared from the official record. One year's reports discussed new investments and growing deposits. The next year's volumes mentioned nothing at all, as though the organization had never existed. No dissolution, no transfer, no explanation. Entire sections appeared removed from history with remarkable precision. Only someone possessing authority over county records could have managed such a disappearance. As she copied dates into a small notebook, Mrs. Penrose approached, carrying another bundle of aging newspapers rescued from storage years earlier. "These weren't indexed," she explained apologetically. "Hardly anyone reads them now." Together, they carefully unfolded brittle pages until one headline caught Lenora's attention: "River Steward Gideon Mercer, missing after storm." According to the article, Gideon had vanished while traveling downstream during heavy spring flooding. His empty skiff was recovered days later, but no body had ever been found. The newspaper concluded that the river had claimed another respected citizen. Yet Lenora immediately noticed something unsettling. Gideon's final letter had been dated nearly 2 months after the reported disappearance. Either the newspaper was wrong, or someone had deliberately reported him dead while he was still alive and hiding the trust records. She asked Mrs. Penrose whether anyone still remembered Gideon Mercer personally. The librarian thought quietly before answering. Not many, but there is one. She pointed toward the western edge of town where a small farmhouse overlooked the river bluffs. Abner Whitlock is 92 now. His father served with Gideon on the original Ferry committee. If anyone remembers those days, it would be him. Lenora thanked her and left before sunset painted the rooftops amber. Abner Whitlock answered his own door after several patient knocks. Though age had bent his back, his eyes remained sharp beneath heavy white brows. At first he seemed puzzled by the unexpected visitor, but the moment she spoke Gideon's name, something changed within his expression. He invited her inside without hesitation. The little house smelled of cedar smoke and dried apples. Every wall displayed faded photographs spanning generations. Abner listened silently while Lenora unfolded Gideon's letter across the kitchen table. His weathered hands trembled noticeably before he reached toward the familiar handwriting. "I haven't seen this in 60 years, he whispered. Most folks believed Gideon drowned. Did he? Lenora asked gently. The old man shook his head very slowly. No. He came here one night after everyone believed him dead. My father hid him in our cellar. Lenora leaned forward, scarcely breathing. Abner stared toward the fireplace as memory carried him backward through time. Gideon had discovered that 3 influential businessmen, together with the county treasurer, planned to seize the River Trust by declaring the trustees deceased or absent, then transferring every asset into newly formed private companies. One of those businessmen had been Silas Bell, grandfather of the very merchant who laughed at Lenora during the auction. When Gideon refused to surrender the records, threats quickly followed. Friends urged him to flee until honest officials could intervene. Before he disappeared, he hid the original documents beneath the ferry dock, because nobody would suspect the very place everyone crossed each day. Why didn't he come back? Lenora asked quietly. Abner closed his eyes for a long moment. Because the men searching for him never stopped searching. He planned to leave for the state capital with copies of the records. He never made it. He told my father if he failed, someone honest would eventually find the originals. He believed truth was patient. Silence settled across the room. Finally, Abner rose with surprising effort and disappeared into a bedroom. When he returned, he carried a narrow wooden box wrapped carefully inside faded cloth. He placed it before Lenora. Father told me never to open it unless someone arrived carrying Gideon's handwriting. Inside rested an iron key, a trustee's brass seal engraved with the River Trust emblem, and a folded parchment bearing the signatures of every original trustee. Along the bottom, Gideon had written one final sentence. If the bearer of these records values the people above personal wealth, the stewardship belongs to them until the trust is restored. Abner smiled sadly. Looks to me like he spent 60 years waiting for you. Lenora accepted the box with humbled silence, understanding more clearly than ever that the discovery beneath the weathered dock had never truly been about hidden money. It had been about preserving the conscience of an entire community, until someone possessed both the courage to reveal it and the humility to use it for everyone, rather than herself. Yet beyond the farmhouse windows, another pair of watchful eyes had quietly noticed the unfamiliar visitor. Horace Bell's hired clerk, returning from a delivery along the western road, recognized Lenora's face and wondered why a woman with nothing left to lose had suddenly begun visiting the oldest keepers of Brimstone Crossing's forgotten history. That single moment of curiosity would soon awaken powerful people who had spent generations believing the river's greatest secret had disappeared forever. When the final hearing ended, nearly 3 months later, every forged claim unraveled beneath the weight of Gideon Mercer's original records. The Community River Trust was restored exactly as its founders had intended, and because Lenora had never claimed a single dollar for herself beyond the return of her family's rightful land, the court appointed an independent board of teachers, farmers, shopkeepers, pastors, and craftsmen to oversee the fund forever. The forgotten wealth rebuilt Brimstone Crossing one careful step at a time. The old schoolhouse received a new roof. A public library was expanded with books for every child. Wells were repaired. The aging bridge was strengthened. Small loans helped struggling families reopen workshops and farms without falling into impossible debt. Even the abandoned ferry dock remained standing, not as a crossing for travelers, but as a quiet memorial where future generations gathered to remember that the greatest treasures are often hidden beneath the places everyone else has stopped noticing. Horace Bell watched his family's dishonest influence fade without anger from the town, only with the quiet consequence of truth finally catching up to deception, while those who had once laughed at Lenora found themselves lowering their heads not because she demanded apologies, but because her grace made them wish they had shown more kindness when she needed it most. Lenora never built a grand mansion, never sought titles, and never spoke proudly of discovering the hidden chamber beneath the dock. Instead, she restored her parents' modest farmhouse, reopened Elias's workshop, planted Miriam's favorite wildflowers beneath the old cottonwood tree, and spent the rest of her years teaching young hands how to mend broken furniture, weathered tools, and sometimes even discouraged hearts. Visitors often asked why she still walked to the old ferry dock every Sunday evening, sitting quietly where the river met the fading light. She would simply smile, rest her hand upon the weathered planks, and answer, because forgotten places deserve to know they are remembered. And perhaps that was the greatest treasure hidden beneath those old boards all along. Not the fortune, not the deeds, not the forgotten ledger, but the reminder that when one honest soul refuses to overlook what everyone else has abandoned, entire communities can find their way home again. We began this story with a young woman standing alone beside a river with almost nothing left except $12.43 stitched into the hem of her skirt. We end it with the same woman leaving behind something far more valuable than wealth, hope carefully restored, justice quietly returned, and a town reminded that compassion is the strongest foundation any community can ever build upon. Long after Lenora Ashcombe's footsteps faded from the ferry dock, the Coldwater River continued carrying its gentle song through Brimstone Crossing, whispering the same timeless lesson to every generation willing to listen, that what the world dismisses today may become tomorrow's greatest blessing, if someone has the courage to look beneath the surface. Thank you for sharing this journey with us. If Lenora's story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell us, what is something in your own life that others overlooked, but proved to be more valuable than anyone imagined? Your story may encourage someone else who needs hope today. And if you enjoy heartfelt frontier tales filled with mystery, resilience, and unforgettable endings, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Berry Tales, and join our growing family of storytellers. Until our next adventure, may you always find hidden blessings where others only see forgotten places. Stay kind, stay hopeful, and we'll see you again soon on Berry Tales.